The sun was getting low over Canyon Lake, painting the sky orange and pink like someone had spilled paint across it. Michael Rodriguez checked his watch, almost 7 p.m., time to finish his rounds and head home. He'd been working as a park ranger here for 3 years now, and he knew these waters better than most people knew their own backyard. Michael loved this job. Every day was different. Some days he helped lost hikers find their way back to the main trail. Other days he rescued baby birds that had fallen from their nests. Today had been quiet though, just a few families fishing and some teenagers jumping off the safe rocks near the shallow end. As he walked along the shoreline, his radio crackled with the usual evening chatter from other rangers. The lake was almost empty now. Most visitors packed up and left before dark because the water could get tricky when you couldn't see properly. That's when accidents happened. Michael was thinking about what to cook for dinner when he heard it. A scream that made his blood run cold. It wasn't the happy shout of kids playing or the excited yell of someone catching a fish. This was pure terror. He spun around, scanning the water. There, about 50 yards out near Devil's Point, he saw someone struggling in the water. The person's head kept disappearing under the surface, then popping back up for just a second, before going under again. "Oh no," Michael whispered. Devil's Point was the most dangerous spot on the whole lake. The rocks underneath created weird currents that could pull even strong swimmers down. They'd lost 3 people there this summer already. Without thinking, Michael dropped his radio and started running toward the water. His boots hit the rocky shore as he tried to get a better look. It was a woman with long dark hair. She was fighting hard against the water, but Michael could see she was losing the battle. He kicked off his boots and threw his ranger jacket on the ground. The water was going to be freezing, but there was no time to worry about that. Someone's life was hanging by a thread. "Hold on," he shouted, even though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "I'm coming." Michael dove into the lake. The cold water hit him like a slap in the face, but he pushed through it. He was a strong swimmer, had been since he was a kid growing up near the Rio Grande. But these currents were something else entirely. As he got closer, he could see the woman more clearly. She was young, maybe in her 20s, and she was exhausted. Her movements were getting weaker. Every time she tried to swim toward shore, the invisible underwater currents pulled her back toward the rocks. "Don't panic," Michael called out as he fought his way through the choppy water. "I've got you." But when he was about 10 feet away, she went under and didn't come back up. Michael's heart nearly stopped. He took a deep breath and dove down into the murky water. The lake was deeper here than it looked from shore, maybe 15 feet. He opened his eyes underwater, but it was getting dark and he could barely see anything. His lungs started burning, but he kept searching. Finally, his hand touched something soft, her shirt. He grabbed hold and kicked hard toward the surface, pulling her with him. When they broke through, she wasn't breathing. This was bad. Really bad. Michael wrapped his arm around her waist and started swimming toward shore using a side stroke. The currents kept trying to pull them back, but he fought against them with everything he had. His legs felt like lead and his lungs were screaming for air, but he couldn't give up now. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes before his feet finally touched the rocky bottom near shore. He half carried, half dragged the unconscious woman onto the beach and immediately checked for a pulse. Nothing. Michael had been trained in CPR when he became a ranger, but he'd never had to use it on someone who was actually dying. His hands were shaking as he tilted her head back and checked her airway. No water came out, which was good, meant her lungs weren't completely flooded. He placed his hands on her chest and started compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then he gave her 2 rescue breaths. Her lips were blue and cold against his. "Come on," he whispered. "Come on, don't do this." He kept going. Compressions, rescue breaths, compressions, rescue breaths. His arms were getting tired, but he couldn't stop. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he remembered his instructor saying most people give up too early. You had to keep trying. After what felt like forever, she suddenly coughed and water came pouring out of her mouth. Michael quickly turned her on her side so she wouldn't choke. She took a huge, gasping breath, then another one. Her eyes fluttered open. They were the most beautiful brown eyes Michael had ever seen, even though they were filled with confusion and fear. "You're okay," he said softly. "You're safe now, just breathe." She tried to sit up, but Michael gently kept her lying down. "Don't move yet, you need to take it easy." "The water," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was getting water for grandmother. The sacred spring." Michael wasn't sure what she meant by sacred spring, but it didn't matter right now. "We need to get you to a hospital. You might have water in your lungs." She shook her head weakly. "I'm fine, really." But Michael could see she was shivering. Badly, he grabbed his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. "What's your name?" "Ayana," she said. "Ayana Bege." "I'm Michael Rodriguez. I'm a ranger here." He was already reaching for his radio to call for an ambulance. "Ayana, I need to call for help. You almost drowned. We need to make sure you're really okay." As he made the call, Ayana struggled to sit up. She looked around at the lake, then at Devil's Point, where she'd almost lost her life. Then she looked at Michael with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You saved my life?" she said quietly. Michael felt embarrassed. Anyone would have done the same thing. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Most people would have been too scared to jump into those currents. He'd risked his own life without even thinking about it. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, along with 2 other rangers and a fire truck. As the paramedics checked Ayana's vital signs and loaded her onto a stretcher, she kept looking back at Michael. "Thank you," she said as they put her in the ambulance. "I owe you everything." Michael watched the ambulance drive away with its lights flashing. He was still wet and cold, standing there in just his uniform shirt and pants. His supervisor was asking him questions about what happened, but Michael's mind was somewhere else. He kept thinking about those brown eyes and the way she'd said his name. He'd saved people before, hikers with broken legs, kids who'd gotten lost, but this felt different somehow. Maybe it was because she'd been so close to death? Maybe it was something else. As he gathered up his boots and jacket, Michael had no idea that this rescue would change his entire life. He didn't know about ancient Apache laws or water spirits or divine decrees. He was just a guide who jumped into a lake to save someone who needed help, but sometimes that's exactly how the most amazing stories begin. Michael couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ayana's face when she first opened her eyes on the beach, the way she looked at him like he was some kind of hero. But he didn't feel like a hero. He just felt worried. About a stranger he'd pulled from the lake. The next morning, he called the hospital to check on her. The nurse told him she was doing fine and would probably go home that afternoon. Michael felt relieved, but also strangely disappointed. He'd been thinking about visiting her, maybe bringing some flowers or something, but that seemed weird. They didn't even know each other. Around lunchtime, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Is this Michael Rodriguez?" The voice was deep and serious, with a slight accent. "Yeah, that's me. This is Joseph Bege. I'm Ayana's grandfather. I would like to meet with you today, if possible." Michael's heart skipped a beat. "Is Ayana okay? Is something wrong?" "She's fine physically, but there are things we must discuss." "Important things. Can you come to the hospital at 3 o'clock? Michael looked at his work schedule. He was supposed to patrol the North Trail this afternoon, but his supervisor would understand. "Yeah, I can be there." "Good. Ask for room 314 and Mr. Rodriguez?" "Yes?" "Bring an open mind." The line went dead, leaving Michael staring at his phone. What did that mean? Bring an open mind for what? At the hospital, Michael felt nervous as he walked down the hallway carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked near the lake. He'd never been good at visiting sick people. He never knew what to say. He knocked on the door of room 314. "Come in," came Ayana's voice. When he opened the door, Michael was surprised to see the room was full of people. Ayana was sitting up in bed, looking much better than she had yesterday. But around her were at least 8 other people, men and women of different ages, all with the same dark hair and serious expressions. "Michael," Ayana said with a small smile, "I'm so glad you came." An elderly man with long gray hair braided down his back stood up from a chair near the window. He was tall and thin, but there was something powerful about the way he carried himself. This had to be the grandfather. "You are Michael Rodriguez?" the man said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir, you must be Mr. Begay." Michael held out his hand, but the older man just stared at him for a long moment before shaking it. "I am Joseph Begay, keeper of the old ways for our people. Please sit." Michael sat down in the only empty chair, suddenly feeling like he was in some kind of job interview. Everyone was looking at him with intense curiosity. "First," Joseph said, "our family wants to thank you for saving Ayana's life. Without your courage, we would be planning a funeral instead of having this conversation." "Anyone would have done the same thing," Michael said, the same thing he'd told Ayana yesterday. Joseph's eyes narrowed slightly. "No, not anyone. The spirits chose you to be there at that moment. They guided your actions." Michael glanced at Ayana, who was looking down at her hands. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "Tell me exactly what happened yesterday," Joseph said. "Every detail." So Michael told the story again. How he heard Ayana scream, how he dove into the water near Devil's Point, how he pulled her unconscious body from the lake and brought her back to life. As he spoke, some of the family members whispered to each other in a language Michael didn't recognize. When he finished, Joseph was quiet for a long time. Finally, he turned to an older woman sitting in the corner. "Grandmother, what do you think?" The woman, who had to be in her 80s, studied Michael like she was looking through him instead of at him. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "The water spirits have spoken. This man carries their blessing." Joseph nodded slowly, then turned back to Michael. "Young man, do you know anything about Apache traditions?" Michael shook his head. "No, sir. I mean, I know some history from when I was in school, but not about traditions or anything like that. Among our people, water is sacred. It is the source of all life. When someone drowns and the water spirits take them, they are gone forever. But when someone returns from the water, brought back by another person's hands, that creates a sacred bond." "Okay," Michael said, though he wasn't sure where this was going. "According to our oldest laws, when a person saves another from drowning, the rescued person's life belongs to their rescuer. This is not just custom, it is divine law decreed by the water spirits themselves." Michael felt his stomach drop. "I'm sorry, what do you mean, belongs to?" Ayana finally looked up at him, and he could see tears in her eyes. "Grandfather, please, this isn't fair to him." But Joseph continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Ayana's life now belongs to you, Michael Rodriguez. According to the water spirit law, she must become your wife." The room went completely silent. Michael felt like someone had just punched him in the chest. He looked around at all the faces, staring at him, then at Ayana, who looked like she wanted to disappear. What? I can't? That's not how things work," Michael stammered. "It is how things work among our people," Joseph said firmly. "This law has guided us for over 1,000 years. My grandfather told me of the last time it was invoked, when he was just a boy. A young Apache warrior saved a girl from the flooding river, and they were married according to the water spirit law. They had 6 children and lived happily until they were old." Michael stood up quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Look, I'm honored that you think so highly of me, but I can't just marry someone I don't even know. And I'm sure Ayana doesn't want to marry a complete stranger either." "What Ayana wants is not the question," said a man who looked like he might be her father. "The spirits have decided." "Dad, stop," Ayana said, her voice stronger now. "This is crazy. We live in the 21st century, not the Stone Age." Several family members started talking at once, some in English and some in what Michael assumed was Apache. The conversation got heated quickly, with people gesturing and raising their voices. Michael felt overwhelmed. He'd come here to check on someone he'd helped, and now he was apparently being told he had to marry her because of some ancient law he'd never heard of. "Excuse me," he said loudly, trying to be heard over the arguing. "Excuse me." The room quieted down. "Look, I respect your traditions, I really do. But where I come from, people choose who they marry. They fall in love first. They get to know each other. He looked at Ayana. I think you're amazing, and I'm glad I was there to help you yesterday. But I can't marry someone just because some old law says I have to. Joseph's expression didn't change. The water spirits do not make mistakes, young man. If they brought you together in this way, there is a reason. Maybe, Michael said. But shouldn't that be something Ayana and I figure out for ourselves? For the first time since he'd started talking, Joseph looked uncertain. He glanced at his granddaughter, who was staring at Michael with an expression he couldn't read. The law is clear, Joseph said, but his voice wasn't as strong as before. Grandfather, Ayana said quietly, what if the spirits want us to choose freely? What if that's the real test? The room fell silent again. Michael could see that Ayana's question had hit something deep. Even the grandmother in the corner was nodding thoughtfully. I need time to think about this, Joseph said finally. We all do. As the family started filing out of the room, Michael found himself alone with Ayana for the first time since he'd pulled her from the lake. I'm sorry, she said. I had no idea they were going to do this. It's not your fault, Michael said. But this is pretty crazy, right? Ayana smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. You have no idea how crazy. My family doesn't joke around when it comes to the old ways. What do you think about all this? He asked. She was quiet for a moment. I think I owe you my life. But I also think you're right. Marriage should be about love, not obligation. Michael felt relieved. At least they were on the same page about that. But, Ayana continued, I also think maybe we should get to know each other before we completely dismiss what my grandfather said. Not because of any law, but because I'd like to know the man who saved my life. Michael felt his heart skip a beat. I'd like that too. As he left the hospital that day, Michael's mind was spinning. 24 hours ago, he'd been a simple park ranger whose biggest worry was making sure tourists didn't litter. Now he was apparently bound by ancient spiritual law to marry a woman he barely knew. But as crazy as it all was, he couldn't stop thinking about Ayana's smile. When she said she wanted to get to know him, maybe the water spirits knew something he didn't. Word traveled fast in a small town. By the time Michael got home from the hospital, his phone was already buzzing with calls from friends and coworkers who had somehow heard about the marriage decree. He ignored most of them, but when his mother called for the third time, he knew he had to answer. Mio, what is this crazy story I'm hearing? Rosa Rodriguez's voice came through the phone like a hurricane. Mrs. Martinez from the grocery store says you're getting married to some Indian girl because of magic water? Michael rubbed his temples. He loved his mother, but she had a way of making complicated things sound even more complicated. Mom, it's not magic water. And she's Apache, not just Indian. Her name is Ayana. I don't care if she's Apache or from space. Are you telling me you're marrying a stranger? I'm not marrying anyone, Mom. At least not right now. It's complicated. Complicated? His mother's voice went up an octave. What's complicated about this? You either want to marry this girl or you don't. Michael sank into his couch already. Exhausted, and it wasn't even dinner time. Can we talk about this later? I need time to think. Think about what? Michael, you're 29 years old. You've never even had a serious girlfriend. Now suddenly you're bound by some ancient law to marry a woman you just met? This sounds like something from one of those telenovelas your aunt watches. After he hung up, Michael's phone immediately rang again. This time it was his supervisor at the Park Service. Rodriguez, I've got reporters calling the main office asking about some Apache marriage ritual. What the hell is going on? Reporters? Michael's heart sank. How do they already know about this? Small town, big story. A park ranger bound by tribal law to marry the woman he rescued? This is front page stuff. I need you to come in tomorrow morning. We have to figure out how to handle this. When Michael finally turned off his phone and tried to watch TV, he couldn't focus on anything. Every channel seemed to be talking about something that reminded him of his situation. A romantic comedy about people who met in unusual circumstances, a news story about cultural traditions. Even the weather report mentioned water levels at local lakes. Meanwhile, across town on the Apache reservation, Ayana was dealing with her own chaos. Her small house was packed with relatives, neighbors, and tribal council members who all had opinions about the water spirit law and what it meant for her future. "This is ridiculous," said her cousin Tommy, a 26-year-old who worked in Phoenix and only came home for holidays. "We can't force people to get married in 2025. What are we, living in the Middle Ages?" "The Middle Ages?" Her Aunt Christina shot back. "These laws kept our people strong for centuries before your Middle Ages even existed. Show some respect." Ayana sat in the corner of her own living room, feeling like a prisoner in her own life. Everyone was talking about her like she wasn't even there. Her head still hurt from yesterday's near drowning, and now she had to listen to her entire extended family debate her future. "What does Ayana want?" asked her younger brother Danny. He was only 19, but sometimes he was the smartest person in the room. The arguing stopped, and everyone turned to look at her. Ayana felt her cheeks burn red. "I want everyone to leave me alone for 5 minutes, so I can think," she said quietly. "This isn't about what you want," said her Uncle Robert. "This is about tribal law, about respecting our ancestors." "But she has rights," Tommy argued. "Even tribal law has to respect individual rights." "Individual rights?" Uncle Robert stood up, his face getting red. "What about tribal rights? What about honoring the spirits that saved her life?" That young man was chosen for a reason. The argument was getting louder again when Ayana's grandmother walked into the room. Elena Bege was small and ancient, but when she spoke, everyone listened. "Enough," she said, and the room went quiet. "You're all acting like children fighting over a toy." She walked over to Ayana and sat down beside her on the couch. "Child, tell me what your heart says." Ayana looked around at all the faces staring at her. These people loved her, she knew that. But right now, their love felt like a heavy blanket she couldn't breathe under. "I don't know, grandmother. Yesterday I was just a teacher getting water for your healing ceremony. Today everyone's telling me I have to marry a stranger. My heart doesn't know what to think." "But what do you think of this man? This Michael?" Ayana thought about the way Michael had looked when her grandfather explained the water spirit law. He could have gotten angry or demanded they leave him alone. Instead, he'd been respectful even when he disagreed. "He seems like a good person," she said. "When he pulled me from the water, his hands were gentle. And today, when grandfather told him about the law, he didn't try to claim me like some prize. He said marriage should be about love." Grandmother Elena nodded, wise words from a young man. "But we don't know each other," Ayana continued. "How can I marry someone I don't know? How can you not get to know someone the spirits brought into your life?" her grandmother asked Dot before Ayana could answer. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Michael. "Hi. I know today was crazy. Would you like to get coffee tomorrow? Just to talk as friends." No pressure about anything else. Ayana stared at the message. It was such a normal thing asking someone for coffee. But nothing about her life felt normal anymore. She showed the message to her grandmother, who smiled. "What should I say?" Ayana asked. "What does your heart want to say?" Ayana typed back, "Yes, I'd like that." The next morning, Michael woke up to find 3 news vans parked outside his apartment complex. He peeked through his bedroom curtains and saw reporters with cameras and microphones waiting by the front entrance. "Great," he muttered. He called in sick to work and snuck out the back exit, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses like some kind of celebrity trying to avoid paparazzi. It was ridiculous, but it worked. He made it to the coffee shop without being recognized. Ayana was already there when he arrived, sitting in a corner booth wearing her own disguise of a hoodie and dark glasses. When she saw him, she pulled down her hood and smiled. "This is insane," she said as he sat down across from her. "Tell me about it." "I've got news crews camping outside my apartment like I'm some kind of reality TV star." They both laughed, and suddenly the tension that had been building since yesterday started to ease. "So," Michael said, "how do you want to handle this?" "I mean, the whole situation." Ayana stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that all night." My family takes the old ways very seriously. They're not going to just forget about the water spirit law. And I can't just pretend I understand it, Michael said. I respect your culture, but this is all new to me. What if we got to know each other? Ayana asked. Not because of any law, but because we want to. Maybe we take some time to see if there's really something here. Michael felt a flutter of hope in his chest. Like dating? Like friendship first, Ayana said carefully. See where it goes? I'd like that, Michael said. But what about your family and the media circus? Ayana sighed. The media will get bored and move on to the next story. My family, well, they'll have to learn to deal with it. This is my life. And if we get to know each other and decide we're not meant to be together, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Ayana said. But Michael, yeah? Thank you for not trying to claim me yesterday. A lot of guys would have seen it as a free pass to get a wife. Michael felt sick at the thought. That's not who I am. If something develops between us, it has to be real. It has to be because we choose each other. Ayana reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. As they sat in that little coffee shop, talking about everything and nothing, both Michael and Ayana began to relax for the first time in 24 hours. Maybe this whole situation was crazy. Maybe ancient laws didn't belong in the modern world. But maybe, just maybe, there was something here worth exploring. Outside, the world was buzzing with opinions about their story. Inside, two people were just trying to figure out if they liked each other's company, and that seemed like a pretty good place to start. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael found himself doing something he never thought he'd do, researching ancient Apache laws in his spare time. What started as simple curiosity had turned into a deep dive that kept him up late into the night, reading everything he could find about water spirits, tribal customs, and marriage traditions. His apartment coffee table was now covered with library books, printouts from websites, and pages of notes he'd scribbled while trying to understand Ayana's world. Some of the stuff he found was fascinating, but a lot of it was confusing or contradictory. The Apache people have 7 different tribes, he read aloud to himself one evening, each with their own variations of traditional law. He was starting to realize that what Joseph Bege had told him might not be the whole story. Different sources gave different information about water spirit laws, and some didn't mention them at all. Michael decided he needed to talk to real experts, not just read about them online. The next morning, he drove to the University of Arizona campus about an hour away, where he'd heard there was a professor who specialized in Apache culture. Dr. Patricia Yellowbird was not what Michael expected. She was younger than he'd imagined, maybe 40, with short hair and a no-nonsense attitude. Her office was packed with books, artifacts, and pictures from various tribes across the Southwest. So you're the famous park ranger, she said when he introduced himself. I heard about your situation on the news. Michael felt his face turn red. Yeah, that's me. I was hoping you could help me understand what I've gotten myself into. Dr. Yellowbird leaned back in her chair and studied him. What do you know about Apache spirituality? Honestly? Almost nothing. I've been reading books for 2 weeks, but I feel like I'm missing something important. You are, she said. You're missing the fact that books can only tell you so much. Apache traditions are passed down through families, through stories, through lived experience. What Joseph Bege told you about the water spirit law, it's real, but it's also complicated. Complicated how? Well, for starters, that particular law hasn't been used in over 60 years. The last documented case was in 1962, and even then, it was controversial within the tribe. Michael pulled out a notebook and started writing. So it's not like this happens all the time? Not at all. In fact, many Apache people today would argue that such laws should be interpreted differently in modern times. The spirit of the law was to create bonds between people who had been brought together by divine intervention. But the idea that it requires marriage, that's where things get complicated. Dr. Yellowbird got up and pulled a thick book from her shelf. She flipped through several pages before finding what she was looking for. Here, she said, pointing to a passage. This is from an interview with an Apache elder in 1978. He talks about how the water spirit law was originally meant to ensure that someone who saved a life would be honored and cared for by the rescued person's family. Marriage was one way to do that, but not the only way. Michael felt a spark of hope. So there might be other options? Possibly. But here's the thing. Joseph Bege is a respected keeper of tradition. If he says the law requires marriage, a lot of people will believe him. The question is whether he's interpreting it correctly or whether he's influenced by his own desires for his granddaughter's future. That afternoon, Michael met Ayana at a small park near the reservation. They'd been having coffee or lunch together almost every day since their first meeting, and Michael was starting to feel like he actually knew her as a person, not just as someone he'd rescued. "I went to see a professor today," he told her as they sat on a bench overlooking a small pond. "Dr. Yellowbird at the university." Ayana raised an eyebrow. "Patricia Yellowbird? She's famous around here. What did she say?" "She thinks your grandfather might be interpreting the water spirit law in a very traditional way, but that there could be other interpretations." Ayana was quiet for a moment, watching a family of ducks swim across the pond. "I've been doing some research too," she said. Finally, "Really?" "I went to see my great-aunt, Rosa. She's 93 and knows more about the old stories than anyone in our family except grandmother Elena." "What did she tell you?" Ayana turned to face him. "She told me about the last time the water spirit law was used. It was her cousin, a girl named Maria, who was saved from drowning by a young man from another tribe." "What happened to them?" "They got married, like the law required, but Aunt Rosa said Maria was miserable for years. She barely knew the man, they had nothing in common, and she felt trapped. Eventually they learned to care for each other, and they had a good life together, but Rosa always wondered what would have happened if Maria had been allowed to choose freely." Michael felt his stomach tighten. That's not exactly encouraging. "But that's not the end of the story," Ayana continued. "Aunt Rosa also told me about another case. From way back in the 1920s, a girl was saved from drowning. But instead of marriage, the man who saved her became like a brother to her family. He was invited to all their ceremonies, treated as a son, and eventually he did marry into the tribe, but to the girl's sister, who he fell in love with naturally." "So there is proceeding for other interpretations?" "Maybe. But here's the thing, Michael. Aunt Rosa also said something else. She said that in both cases, the spirits had brought the right people together, even if the path wasn't what anyone expected." Michael wasn't sure what to make of that. "What do you think she meant?" Ayana smiled, but it was a complicated smile. "I think she meant that maybe we shouldn't worry so much about ancient laws and just focus on getting to know each other." "And how do you feel about that?" "About getting to know each other, I mean." Ayana was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Can I tell you something? Yesterday, when you didn't show up for lunch because you were at the university, I was disappointed. Not because of any law or tradition, but because I actually missed talking to you." Michael felt his heart skip a beat. "Really? Really? These past 2 weeks, you've become my favorite part of each day? You make me laugh, you listen when I talk about my students, and you ask good questions about things you don't understand, instead of just pretending to know." "You've become my favorite part of the day too," Michael admitted. "When I'm reading about Apache culture, it's not because I feel like I have to anymore. It's because I want to understand the world you come from." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the ducks and enjoying the warm afternoon sun. Finally, Ayana spoke again. "I want to take you to meet my grandmother." "Not my grandfather. He's too caught up in the legal aspects of all this." "But grandmother Elena, the medicine woman. She's the one who really understands the spiritual side of our traditions." "Are you sure? I don't want to intrude on anything sacred." "You wouldn't be intruding. She's been asking about you, actually. She wants to meet the man who brought me back from the water spirits." That evening, Michael called his mother to tell her about his conversation with Dr. Yellowbird and his plans to meet Ayana's grandmother. "Mio," his mother said, "can I ask you something?" "Sure, Mom." "Are you doing all this research because you feel obligated, or because you actually like this girl?" Michael thought about it. 2 weeks ago, he would have said it was purely obligation. But now, I like her, Mom. I really like her. She's smart and funny and kind. When she talks about her students or her family, her whole face lights up. And when she's trying to explain some Apache tradition to me, she gets this little wrinkle in her forehead because she wants to make sure I understand. His mother was quiet for a moment. That's how I knew I loved your father, she said finally, when I started noticing the little things about him that no one else would care about. But Mom, what if we're just caught up in the drama of the situation? What if we only think we like each other because of all this crazy ancient law stuff? Michael, do you think about her when she's not around? All the time. Do you want to tell her about things that happened to you during the day? Yeah. Do you worry about her feelings and want to make her happy? Michael thought about how disappointed he'd felt when he saw Ayanna look sad during their conversation about her aunt's story. Yes, then it doesn't matter how you met or what laws brought you together, his mother said. What matters is what you choose to do now. As Michael hung up the phone, he realized his mother was right. Whatever the water spirits had or hadn't intended, whatever ancient laws did or didn't apply, the most important thing was what he and Ayanna decided for themselves. Tomorrow, he would meet the medicine woman who might hold the key to understanding, the spiritual forces that had brought them together. But tonight, all he could think about was Ayanna's smile. When she said he'd become her favorite part of each day, maybe the spirits really did know something he didn't. Or maybe sometimes the most magical thing that could happen was two people simply choosing to care about each other, one conversation at a time. Meeting grandmother Elena changed everything for Michael. The old woman lived in a small adobe house on the edge of the reservation, surrounded by gardens full of plants Michael had never seen before. Wind chimes made from polished stones hung from her porch, creating gentle music whenever the breeze picked up. When Ayanna introduced them, Elena took Michael's hands in hers and looked into his eyes for what felt like forever. Her hands were tiny and weathered, but surprisingly strong. You have good spirit, she said finally. I can see why the water chose you. Thank you, ma'am, Michael said, not sure what else to say. Elena smiled. Sit, both of you. We have much to talk about. They spent the afternoon on Elena's porch, drinking tea made from herbs she grew herself and talking about everything from Michael's childhood to Ayanna's work as a teacher. Elena asked Michael about his family, his dreams, his fears. She wanted to know why he became a park ranger, what made him happy, what kept him awake at night. You love the land, Elena observed after Michael told her about his favorite hiking trails. That's good. Apache people believe the land and the people are connected. You can't understand one without the other. I've always felt that way, Michael said. Even as a kid, I felt more at home outside than anywhere else. Elena nodded approvingly. And you, granddaughter, she said to Ayanna, what do you see in this young man? Ayanna blushed. Grandmother, we're just getting to know each other. That wasn't my question. Ayanna glanced at Michael, then back at her grandmother. I see someone who jumps into dangerous water to save a stranger. I see someone who could have walked away from our crazy family traditions but chose to learn about them instead. I see someone who makes me want to be a better teacher, a better person. Michael felt warmth spread through his chest at her words. Elena stood up and walked to the edge of her porch, looking out at the desert landscape. The water spirit law isn't about forcing people together, she said without turning around. It's about recognizing when the spirits put two souls in each other's path for a reason. But the spirits can only open the door. You have to choose to walk through it, she turned back to them. Michael, would you like to learn our ways? Not because you have to, but because you want to understand Ayanna's world. Yes, ma'am. I would? Good, come back tomorrow evening. We'll start with the basics. Over the next month, Michael found himself living a double life. During the day, he worked his regular job as a park ranger. But 3 evenings a week, he drove to the reservation for lessons with Elena and other tribal elders. He learned about Apache history, about the significance of different ceremonies, about the connection between nature and spirituality. He struggled with the Apache language, mispronouncing words until the children giggled and the adults patiently corrected him. Your accent is terrible, Ayana teased one evening after he butchered a simple greeting. Hey, I'm trying, Michael protested. Your language is harder than it looks, but he kept trying. He learned to weave baskets, to identify medicinal plants, to participate in sweat lodge ceremonies. Some of the tribal members remained skeptical of the outsider who had suddenly appeared in their community, but others began to welcome him. You're not just learning our culture, observed Ben Crowfeather, one of the younger council members. You're respecting it, that's rare. Meanwhile, Ayana was getting her own education. Michael invited her to meet his family, and she quickly discovered that Rodriguez family gatherings were loud, chaotic, and full of love, not so different from her own family, really. Michael's mother, Rosa, had been suspicious at first. But after one dinner where Ayana helped cook and told stories about her students, Rosa pulled Michael aside. I like her, she said simply. She's not trying to be someone she's not. And she makes you smile more than I've seen in years. Ayana also started joining Michael on his hiking trips, learning about the plants and animals of the desert from his perspective. She discovered that he could identify bird calls from hundreds of yards away and knew the name of every wildflower that bloomed in the spring. You see the desert differently than I do, she told him one afternoon as they sat beside a natural spring. I see it as home, as the place where my ancestors lived, but you see it as something alive, something that talks to you. Maybe that's why the water spirits chose me, Michael said. Because I was already listening. Their relationship was developing naturally, but they were both aware that the entire community was watching them. Some people supported their growing connection, while others thought the whole situation was either outdated or moving too fast. The biggest opposition came from David Naich, a tribal council member who had once dated Ayana. David was smart, successful, and came from a prominent Apache family. He had never gotten over their breakup, and he clearly didn't like seeing Ayana with an outsider. This is ridiculous, David said loudly during a council meeting that Michael and Ayana weren't supposed to know about. We're allowing our ancient laws to be manipulated by some park ranger who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Word of David's opposition got back to Michael through Ben Crowfeather, who had become something of an ally. Don't let David get to you, Ben advised. He's jealous, plain and simple. But he's also influential, and he's starting to convince some people that this whole thing is a mistake. The pressure was getting to both Michael and Ayana. One evening, after a particularly awkward encounter with David at the trading post, Ayana seemed distant and quiet. Are you okay? Michael asked as they sat in his truck overlooking the valley. I don't know, she said honestly. Sometimes I wonder if we're forcing something that shouldn't be forced. Maybe David is right. Maybe we're just caught up in the drama of everything. Michael felt panic rise in his chest. Do you want to stop seeing each other? Ayana was quiet for a long moment. No, she said finally. But I want to be sure we're together because we choose to be, not because everyone expects us to be. What would convince you? Ayana turned to look at him. Tell me why you want to be with me. Not because of any law or tradition or rescue. Just because of who I am, Michael took a deep breath. I want to be with you because when you laugh, it's like music. Because you get excited about teaching kids to read the same way I get excited about protecting wildlife. Because when you explain Apache traditions to me, you do it with patience and love, not judgment. Because when we're together, everything feels right in a way I've never experienced before. He paused, then continued. I want to be with you because when I imagine my future, you're in it. Not because of spirits or laws, but because I can't imagine being truly happy without you. Ayana's eyes filled with tears. I want to be with you because you make me brave, she said. Because you've shown me that love doesn't have to follow rules or timelines. Because you've learned more about my culture in 2 months than David learned in 2 years of dating me. Because when I watch you with the children at the reservation, I can see what kind of father you'd be. They kissed then, properly, for the first time since they'd met. It wasn't dramatic or earth-shaking. It was gentle and sweet and felt like coming home. So what do we do about David and the people who think we're making a mistake? Michael asked. Ayana smiled. We prove them wrong. We show everyone that the water spirits knew exactly what they were doing when they brought us together. And how do we do that? By being happy, she said simply. By building something real together. By honoring both our cultures while creating something new. As they drove back toward town that night, Michael realized that somewhere along the way, he had stopped thinking about ancient laws and divine decrees. He was just a man in love with a woman who loved him back. Maybe that was the real magic? The water spirits had intended all along, but he also knew that their biggest challenges were still ahead. David's opposition was growing stronger, and soon they would have to decide whether their love was strong enough to withstand a formal challenge to the very law that had brought them together. A letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by an official tribal courier to both Michael's apartment and Ayana's house. The envelope bore the seal of the Apache Tribal Council, and inside was a formal notice that made Michael's hands shake as he read it. Petition for review of traditional marriage decree case, number 2025-47. The undersigned formally challenges the validity and application of the water spirit. Law is invoked by Elder Joseph Bege on behalf of Ayana Bege and Michael Rodriguez. The petition was signed by David Naich and supported by 4 other council members. Michael immediately called Ayana. "Did you get the letter?" "I'm reading it now." Her voice sounded tired. "David's really doing this. What does it mean exactly?" "It means we have to appear before the tribal court and defend our right to be together. They're questioning whether the water spirit law even applies to our situation." That evening they met with Joseph Bege and Elena to figure out how to respond. The meeting took place in Joseph's house, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "This is an insult to our ancestors," Joseph said, pacing back and forth in his living room. "David Naich thinks he can overturn 1,000 years of tradition because he's jealous." "Grandfather, maybe we should listen to what they have to say," Ayana said carefully. "David isn't the only one who signed the petition. Other council members have concerns too." "Their concerns are based on modern thinking, not spiritual law," Joseph replied firmly. "The water spirits don't care about modern thinking." Elena, who had been quietly sipping tea in the corner, finally spoke up. "Perhaps the spirits want us to examine our own hearts. Perhaps this challenge is part of their plan." Everyone turned to look at her. "What do you mean, grandmother?" Ayana asked. "I mean that sometimes we must prove our faith by defending it." "Michael and Ayana, do you love each other?" "Yes," they said at the same time. "Then you have nothing to fear from David Naich or anyone else." But as the days passed, Michael began to realize just how much they did have to fear. The tribal community was splitting into 2 camps, and the division was tearing families apart. At the grocery store, some people crossed the street to avoid talking to Ayana. Others went out of their way to show their support. Children at her school asked her if it was true that she was being forced to marry a stranger. Parents called the principal to complain that their teacher was involved in a controversial situation. Michael faced his own challenges at work. His supervisor called him into the office after receiving complaints from some tribal members who didn't want him patrolling near the reservation anymore. "Rodriguez, I'm not taking sides in your personal life," his boss said. "But this is affecting your job. Some people don't trust you anymore. They think you're using your position to gain influence in tribal politics." "That's not true," Michael protested. "I've never used my job for personal gain. I know that, and you know that. But perception is reality in situations like this. I'm going to have to move you to a different patrol area until this gets resolved." The worst part was the media attention. News crews had returned, and reporters were digging into every aspect of their lives. Someone leaked Michael's personnel file, revealing that he'd once been arrested for public intoxication in college, charges that were dropped, but it made him look bad. Another reporter found out that Ayana had briefly dated David Naich and wrote an article suggesting she was caught in a love triangle with racial undertones. "This is getting out of hand," Michael said one evening as they sat in Ayana's living room, reading the latest newspaper articles about their case. "Maybe we should just forget the whole thing. Get married in Vegas or something and leave everyone else out of it." "We can't do that," Ayana said, though she sounded tempted. "If we run away, David wins." And more importantly, we'd be abandoning the people who believe in us. She pointed to a stack of letters on her coffee table. Look at these. They're from Apache teenagers who say our story gives them hope that they can honor tradition while still choosing their own path. From elderly people who remember when the old ways were stronger. From young couples who are dealing with their own family pressures about marriage. Michael picked up one of the letters. It was from a 16-year-old girl whose grandmother wanted her to marry her cousin to keep their bloodline pure. Your story shows me that love and tradition can work together, the girl had written. Thank you for being brave. Okay, Michael said, putting the letter down. We fight. The tribal court hearing was scheduled for the following month, and Michael knew they needed help. Elena suggested they hire a lawyer who specialized in tribal law, but Joseph insisted that bringing in outsiders would only make things worse. We handle this the Apache way, he said. We present our case to the council and trust in justice. But Ayana had other ideas. She convinced her grandfather to let them at least consult with a legal expert. Even if they didn't hire one officially. The lawyer they met with was a woman named Rebecca Yassi, a Navajo attorney who had experience with tribal court cases. She reviewed their situation and gave them some sobering news. David Naich is smart, she said. He's not challenging the existence of the water spirit law. That would be too controversial. Instead, he's questioning its application in your specific case. What do you mean? Michael asked. He's arguing that the law only applies when both parties are Apache, and that it requires the rescued person to be unconscious or near death. Since you performed CPR and brought Ayana back to consciousness, he's claiming the water spirits had already released her. Ayana felt her stomach drop. Is that a valid argument? It's creative, Rebecca admitted. And it might work, especially with council members who are already skeptical about applying ancient laws in modern situations. Michael felt anger rising in his chest. So David gets to reinterpret thousand-year-old laws to suit his personal agenda? Actually, Rebecca said, that's exactly what you could argue he's doing. The law has always been interpreted by tribal elders, not by individual council members with personal interests. She leaned forward in her chair. But here's the thing, you two have an advantage that David doesn't expect. What's that? You genuinely love each other. That wasn't true in most historical applications of this law. Usually it was about obligation and duty. But if you can prove that the spirits brought you together for love, not just rescue, you might have a stronger case than anyone realizes. As they left Rebecca's office, Michael felt both hopeful and terrified. The hearing was still 3 weeks away, but he could already feel the weight of the entire community's expectations pressing down on them. Are you ready for this? He asked Ayana as they sat in his truck outside her house. No, she said honestly, but I'm ready to fight for us. For what we have, even if we lose? Even if the council rules against us? Ayana took his hand. Michael, I need to tell you something. Even if the council says the water spirit law doesn't apply, even if David wins his challenge, I still want to be with you, law or no law, spirits or no spirits. Michael felt tears sting his eyes. Really? Really? Somewhere along the way, this stopped being about ancient traditions and started being about love. David can challenge the law all he wants, but he can't challenge what we feel for each other. They kissed in the fading light of the desert sunset, both knowing that their biggest battle was still ahead of them. In 3 weeks, they would stand before the tribal council and fight for their right to be together. But win or lose, they had already won the thing that mattered most. They had found each other, chosen each other, and learned to love each other freely. Now they just had to convince everyone else that sometimes the spirits work in ways that look a lot like destiny, but feel exactly like choice. The tribal council meeting was supposed to be held in the community center, but so many people wanted to attend that they had to move it to the high school gymnasium. Michael had never seen so many people gathered for a tribal proceeding. The bleachers were packed with Apache families, reporters, curious locals, and even some people who had driven in from other reservations to witness the historic hearing. Michael sat with Ayana in the front row, both of them dressed in their best clothes. He wore a dark suit his mother had insisted on buying for him, while Ayana had chosen a traditional Apache dress that her grandmother had made years ago. Their hands were clasped tightly together, and Michael could feel both of them trembling. Slightly, the 7-member tribal council sat at a long table on the basketball court, with Chief Robert Crow Dog presiding. Joseph Begay sat at a smaller table to their right, ready to argue for the validity of the water spirit law. David Naich sat at another table to their left. Surrounded by legal documents and looking confident, Chief Crow Dog called the session to order, and the gymnasium fell silent. We are here today to examine a question that goes to the heart of who we are as Apache people, the chief began. How do we honor our ancestors while living in the modern world? How do we interpret laws that have guided us for generations in situations our ancestors never imagined? He looked directly at Michael and Ayana. This case involves more than just two people. It involves the very soul of our tradition. David Naich spoke first, and Michael had to admit the man was an impressive speaker. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and spoke with the confidence of someone who had attended law school before returning to serve his people. Honored council members, David began, I stand before you today not as a jealous rival, but as a guardian of our people's future. The water spirit law is sacred, but it must be applied correctly, not bent to fit modern romance. He paced in front of the council table like a courtroom lawyer. The law states that when the water spirits claim a life and that life is returned by another's hands, a sacred bond is created. But in this case, the spirits never truly claimed Ayana Begay. Mr. Rodriguez pulled her from the water while she was still conscious, still fighting. The spirits had not taken her. Michael felt his heart sink. David's argument sounded logical, even to him. Furthermore, David continued, the law has always applied only between Apache people. Marriage bonds our bloodlines, strengthen our genetic heritage, preserve our culture. How can we ask the water spirits to bless a union that dilutes rather than strengthens our people? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people nodded in agreement, while others shook their heads disapprovingly. When David finished, Chief Crow Dog turned to Joseph Begay. Elder Begay, you may present your interpretation. Joseph stood slowly, his age showing more than usual, but when he spoke, his voice was strong and clear. My friend David speaks with modern logic, Joseph said. But the spirits do not follow modern logic. They follow the deeper currents of life itself. He walked closer to the crowd, speaking not just to the council, but to everyone present. Ayana was under the water. She was not breathing. Her spirit was departing her body. If Michael Rodriguez had arrived 30 seconds later, she would have been gone forever. The spirits brought him to that exact place at that exact moment. This was not accident. This was divine intervention. Joseph paused, letting his words sink in. As for the question of bloodlines, the spirits do not see skin color or tribal membership. They see souls. They see hearts. They see the connections that span generations and cultures. Michael Rodriguez may not have been born Apache, but he has shown more respect for our ways in 3 months than some of our own young people show in a lifetime. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. But, Joseph continued, there is a way to settle this question beyond all doubt. Michael felt Ayana tense beside him. Whatever Joseph was about to propose, she hadn't expected it. In the old days, when the application of sacred law was questioned, we relied on the vision quest of the water spirits. The man who claims the bond must prove his connection to the spirits who brought them together. He must spend 3 days and nights alone in the desert, fasting and seeking visions. If the spirits approve of the union, they will show him signs. If they reject it, he will return with nothing and the bond will be considered false. Chief Crow Dog leaned forward. Elder Begay, the vision quest has not been attempted in over 40 years. It is dangerous. People have died, yes, Joseph said simply, which is why only a man with true spiritual calling would attempt it. All eyes turned to Michael. He felt like the entire world was waiting for his answer. Beside him, Ayana whispered, you don't have to do this. But Michael knew he did. Not because of any law or tradition, but because this was the only way to prove to everyone, including himself, that what he and Ayana had was real. "I'll do it," he said, standing up. David Naich looked shocked. "This is ridiculous. We're asking a non-Apache to undertake one of our most sacred ceremonies?" "The spirits will decide if he is worthy," Joseph replied. "That is the point of the test." Chief Crow Dog consulted with the other council members for several minutes before announcing their decision. "The council agrees to allow the vision quest on 2 conditions. First, Michael Rodriguez must be accompanied by a spiritual guide approved by this council. Second, if he fails to receive visions or if he abandons the quest, the water spirit law will be declared invalid in this case. And if he succeeds?" asked Rebecca Yazzie, who was sitting in the crowd. "Then David Naich's challenge will be rejected, and the union will be blessed by this council." As people filed out of the gymnasium, Michael felt numb. In agreeing to the vision quest, he had committed to 3 days alone in the desert with no food or water, seeking visions from spirits he wasn't even sure he believed in. That night, Elena came to see him. She brought tea and advice. "You're scared," she observed, studying his face. "Terrified," Michael admitted. "What if I don't see anything? What if the spirits don't talk to people like me?" Elena smiled. "Child, the spirits have been talking to you since the day you jumped into that lake. You just haven't been listening with the right ears." "What do you mean?" "You felt connected to the land since you were young. You became a park ranger to protect and serve nature. You risked your life to save a stranger. You've spent months learning our ways not because you had to, but because something inside you called you to do it. If that's not spiritual calling, what is?" She handed him a small pouch made of soft leather. "This contains sacred herbs. When you light them, the smoke will help clear your mind and open your heart. But remember, the visions you seek aren't magic tricks. They're messages from the deepest part of yourself, the part that already knows what's true." 3 days later, Michael found himself standing at the edge of the desert with Tony Clearwater, a medicine man who had agreed to guide him to the sacred site and watch over him from a distance. Ayana was there too, along with Joseph and Elena and several other tribal members. "I'll be back in 3 days," Michael told Ayana, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "You'd better be," she said, tears in her eyes. "Because whether you have visions or not, whether the spirits approve or not, I love you. That's not going to change." As Michael walked into the vast desert, carrying only a water bottle for emergencies and Elena's pouch of herbs, he felt smaller than he'd ever felt in his life. Behind him was everything he'd ever known. Ahead of him was a test that would determine not just his future with Ayana, but his understanding of himself and his place in a world much larger and more mysterious than he'd ever imagined. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Soon it would be dark, and he would be alone with the spirits, the stars, and whatever truth was waiting for him in the silence of the desert night. The first day in the desert nearly broke Michael's spirit. The sun was merciless, and without food, his body began to feel weak by midday. He found shelter under a large rock formation and tried to meditate like Elena had taught him, but his mind kept wandering to worries about Ayana, about the council's decision, about whether he was making a terrible mistake. By sunset, his lips were dry and cracked despite Tony Clearwater's warning to take tiny sips from his emergency water only if absolutely necessary. Michael lit some of the sacred herbs Elena had given him, and the sweet smoke drifted up toward the darkening sky. But no visions came. Just hunger, thirst, and the growing fear that he wasn't spiritual enough for this test. The second day was worse. Michael woke up dizzy and nauseated. Every step felt like walking through thick mud. He spent most of the day sitting in whatever shade he could find, trying to quiet his mind and listen for some kind of sign from the spirits. But all he heard were his own doubts echoing in his head. "What if I'm not worthy?" he whispered to the empty desert. "What if the spirits don't want me with Ayana?" That night, as he lay on the hard ground staring at more stars than he'd ever seen in his life, Michael started to understand something Elena had tried to tell him. The visions weren't going to be like movies playing in his head. They were going to come from the quiet places inside himself that he rarely paid attention to. On the third day, something changed. Michael woke before sunrise feeling strangely peaceful despite his physical weakness. The desert around him looked different somehow, more alive, more connected. He could see how every plant, every rock, every tiny insect was part of something larger. As the sun reached its peak, Michael found himself at a natural spring hidden between two canyon walls. The water was clear and cold, bubbling up from deep underground. He knelt beside it and saw his own reflection looking back at him, but somehow it didn't look quite like him anymore. His face looked older, wiser, more at peace. And then he saw her. Ayana was standing on the other side of the spring, but not the Ayana he knew. This woman wore traditional Apache clothing from long ago, her hair braided with feathers and beads. She was beautiful in a timeless way that made Michael's heart ache. "You have traveled far to find me," she said, her voice echoing strangely in the canyon. "Are you really here?" Michael asked. She smiled. "I am as real as your love for me. As real as the choice you made to dive into dangerous water to save a stranger." Michael stood up, his legs shaky from 3 days of fasting. "The council needs to know if the spirits approve of us being together." "The spirits have already shown their approval," she said. "They brought you to the water at the exact moment I needed you. They gave you the courage to risk your own life. They opened your heart to love not just me, but my people, my culture, my world." She walked around the spring toward him, and Michael could see that her feet didn't quite touch the ground. "But the choice to be together must be yours and mine alone," she continued. "Not because of ancient laws or divine decrees, but because we choose love over fear, understanding over prejudice, hope over tradition for tradition's sake." As she reached him, she placed her hand over his heart. Michael felt warmth spread through his entire body. "Look into the water," she said. "See what the spirits see." Michael looked down at the spring and gasped. Instead of his reflection, he saw scenes playing out like movies on the water's surface. He saw himself and the real Ayana standing together beside this same spring, but they were older. Children with dark hair and bright eyes played at the water's edge, some with his features, some with hers. The children were teaching other children in a school that seemed to blend Apache and Mexican traditions. "Our future," he whispered. "One possible future," the vision Ayana said. "If you choose it, if she chooses it. If you both have the courage to create something new while honoring something old." The scenes in the water changed. Now he saw himself working not just as a park ranger, but as a bridge between the Apache community and the outside world, helping to protect sacred lands and teaching others about Apache culture. He saw Ayana beside him, her teaching expanded beyond the classroom to help preserve her people's traditions for future generations. "The water spirits didn't bring you together to follow an ancient law," the vision said. "They brought you together to help both your peoples learn from each other, to show that love can cross any boundary when it's built on respect and understanding." Michael felt tears streaming down his face. "What do I need to do?" "Return to your people. Tell them what you have seen. But remember, visions show possibilities, not certainties. You and Ayana must still choose your path together, day by day, choice by choice." The vision Ayana began to fade, but her voice remained clear. "The water that saved my life flows in sacred springs throughout this desert. It connects all living things. Love is like that water. It flows where it needs to go, connecting hearts that were meant to be joined." As the vision disappeared, Michael found himself alone beside the spring again, but he no longer felt alone. He felt connected to something vast and ancient and beautiful. He filled his water bottle from the spring and began the journey back to where Tony Clearwater was waiting. Meanwhile, back on the reservation, Ayana was going through her own spiritual experience. Elena had suggested that while Michael sought visions in the desert, Ayana should spend time in prayer and meditation, asking the spirits to guide her heart as well. On the third night, as she sat in Elena's medicine lodge burning sage and singing traditional songs, Ayana fell into a deep trance. In her vision, she stood beside the same sacred spring that Michael was seeing, But in her vision she saw their story from the spirit's perspective. She saw how the currents in Canyon Lake had been guided by unseen hands to bring her to the exact spot where Michael would hear her cries. She saw how every choice they had made since that day, his decision to learn about Apache culture, her decision to open her heart to him, their mutual choice to fight for their love, had been supported by spiritual forces that wanted to see two peoples come together in understanding, but most importantly, she saw that the spirit's greatest gift wasn't the ancient law that had brought them together. It was the freedom to choose love over obligation, understanding over prejudice, hope over fear. When Michael returned from the desert 3 days later, thin and sunburned but glowing with peaceful energy, the tribal council reconvened to hear his report. The gymnasium was packed again, but this time the atmosphere felt different, more reverent, more hopeful. Michael stood before the council and spoke in a voice that was quiet but carried to every corner of the room. "I saw the sacred spring," he said. "I saw visions of possible futures. But the most important thing I learned is that the water spirits didn't bring Ayana and me together because of an ancient law. They brought us together to show that love doesn't recognize boundaries of race or culture when it's built on respect and genuine caring." He looked at Ayana, who was sitting in the front row with tears in her eyes. "The spirits showed me that we have a choice. We can honor the water spirit law by getting married because it's required, or we can honor the deeper meaning behind the law by choosing to marry because we love each other and want to build a life together." Ayana stood up. "I choose love," she said simply. "Law or no law, spirits or no spirits, I choose Michael because my heart has chosen him." "And I choose Ayana," Michael said, "not because the water spirits commanded it, but because loving her has made me a better man, and building a life with her feels like coming home." Chief Crow Dog consulted with the other council members, then stood to address the crowd. "The vision quest has been completed successfully. Michael Rodriguez has proven his spiritual connection to our people and our ways. But more than that, both he and Ayana have shown us that the highest law is the law of love freely given." He paused, looking around the room. "This council recognizes the validity of the water spirit law in bringing these two people together. But we also recognize their right to choose their future based on love rather than obligation. We give our blessing to their union, and we welcome Michael Rodriguez as a brother to our people." The gymnasium erupted in cheers and applause. Even David Naich stood and applauded, finally accepting that he had been defeated not by ancient laws, but by something much more powerful, two people who had found in each other a love worth fighting for. 6 months later, Michael and Ayana were married beside the sacred spring where they had both received their visions. The ceremony blended Apache and Mexican traditions, creating something beautiful and new while honoring both their cultures. Elena officiated, with Joseph proudly walking Ayana down the aisle and Michael's parents beaming from the front row. As they exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to honor both tradition and innovation, both their separate cultures and the new life they were creating together. Everyone present felt they were witnessing something truly magical. 1 year after the wedding, Ayana gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, near the same sacred spring where their parents had been spiritually joined. Tribal elders declared that the children carried the blessing of the water spirits.